So given this, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, being involved in some way, being compromised with the Chinese, probably Biden administration, they thought is going to go slow with China. But then he also took some harsh decisions against China. Probably a Republican regime would have taken much harsher decision. We don't know. Any which way, there is a bipartisan agreement in US that China is their long-term strategic threat. So how do you see this play out, sir? The American, Nancy Pelosi coming to Taiwan, they're trying to needle China big way. And then, China is unable to really do much to, whatever US is throwing at them. So how do you see this China US rivalry conflict panning out in the next, let's say, a year or so?
In 1979 February, Deng Xiaoping went to the White House and they had three consensus. One consensus is on China rise. So the Americans helped China to rise in the international system. The second consensus was on Taiwan, that both of them work for a peaceful resolution. The third consensus was on the joint disintegration of the Soviet Union. So the last one was completed by 91. And the first one was also completed. China had risen, today $19 trillion economy. Even on Taiwan, the consensus was reached because till recently, there were not many crises in the Taiwan Straits between China and the US. So these three consensus were the basis for the China-US relations. However, the Chinese began going away, and in the 19th Communist Party Congress, they said that China wants to occupy the center stage. So which basically means China wanted to replace the United States as the global hegemon. So this has triggered alarm bells in the American bipartisan arena. And now we see, after the longer telegram and the US Secretary of State speech, and before Pompeo's speech in the Philadelphia and other places, library and other places. So the consensus is now broken on all these three aspects, especially the first two. So late Trump administration carried the tariff wars. So they increased tariffs on hundreds of products. Chinese retaliated. That is a sign that China is standing up to the United States. And that resulted further in the clash between the Chinese and the Americans. Now, a few facts. 77,000 American companies are today functioning in China. They have a cumulative investment of $700 billion. So after the Trump administration tariff wars, many of them thought of moving away from China, but China also began giving them incentives or even cajoling them. For example, Xi Jinping wrote a letter to the Starbucks chief and said, if you want to work in China, you have to put pressure on the White House. So what we generally saw, the American companies putting pressure on China, it has now been reversed. Chinese are putting pressure on the American companies against the American establishment. So the threat of walking away from China market did not really happen. However, the concern is in the global commons, cybersecurity, maritime space. In this, the Americans began to put restrictions on Huawei and ZTE, Chongqing. So on October 7th, the Americans retaliated by a ban of $130 billion in the semiconductor industry, because the Chinese began a Made in China 2025 project. As a part of this, they plan to restrict any imports from abroad. 80% of the Chinese products will be selected from the domestic market. So while China is saying it is part of the globalization, it wants to restrict the American products or Western products and monopolize its own domestic market in violation of the WTO, World Trade Organization, market economy principles and others. So this has again raised alarm bells in Washington, DC, and this resulted in the ban on semiconductor industry because Huawei is planning to be the leader in 5G across the globe. And this semiconductor ban had reversed its plans to implement 5G this year. And it may be stalled for the time being because of the crucial components have been missing in the Huawei inventory. So they may go slow on this. And on the other hand, TSMC from Taiwan had invested in Arizona. TSMC is also diversifying to India and other markets. The Changzhou factory of the Foxconn has been, almost destroyed by the Chinese protests, the iPhone factories. So this resulted in many companies shifting because of COVID, because of the uncertainty protests in China, and the tariff wars between US and China. This is one of the casualties. Now, Foxconn is also moving out into India. Mangalore, Pune, Gujarat have been identified for tens of billions of dollars of investment. And in fact, the latest iPhone is being manufactured from India. And so there is a diversification. When Shinzo Abe was around, he also announced a $200 billion incentives for the 83,000 Japanese companies functioning in China market. It was not really successful like the American companies, but 200-300 of these have shifted, big ones, shifted to Vietnam, Indonesia, or others. So a new trend has begun of shift from China market. And as China also became highly nationalist, this is an inevitable trend for them as well. So this provides an opportunity for India, provided it hits at the right moment. Meaning, in 1992, Deng Xiaoping announced the FDI policy for China when the investment environment in Japan, South Korea was hotting up. And the wage labor increase in Japan, South Korea resulted in much of this capital moving to China. So Indian government also needs to look at the larger picture, adopt suitable policies for attracting capital and the manufacturing sector from these Western companies, Japan, South Korea, and others.
Let's see, sir, how this, World Bank is predicting this 2023 is going to be a tough year for the whole world, and that there'll be a recession in at least 20-30% of the world. So let's see how it pans out, and hopefully we should be in a better situation, buffering out some of it, I suppose. Share this video, like, subscribe, and comment, and then encourage a nationalistic channel like Nationalist Hub.